The lighthouse stood at the edge of the cliff, where the land ended and the sea began. It was tall and white, with a red stripe around the top, and it had been standing there for more than 120 years. The paint was peeling in places, and the iron railing around the walkway had turned brown with rust, but the light still worked. Every evening, as the sky grew dark, the light turned on and swept across the water in a slow, steady circle, once, twice, 3 times a minute, guiding ships past the rocks below. A man named Osman had looked after the lighthouse for 31 years. He had come to the cliff as a young man of 25, sent by the Maritime Authority to replace the keeper before him. That keeper had been old and tired and ready to leave. Osman had not been tired. He had been full of energy and plans. He had thought he would stay for 2 or 3 years, learn the work, and then move on to something else, a job in the city, perhaps, or a position at the harbor office. But 2 years became 5, and 5 became 10, and 10 became 31. The cliff, the sea, the sound of the wind against the tower, these things had become his life. He had married a woman from the village below the cliff, and they had raised a daughter in the small stone house beside the lighthouse. His wife had died 7 years ago, taken by an illness that had moved through her body the way storms move across the sea, slowly at first, then all at once. His daughter had grown up and left for the city. Now Osman was 56, and he lived alone on the cliff with the lighthouse and the sea and the wind. He did not mind the solitude. He had never been a man who needed many people around him. He had his routines, checking the light, cleaning the lenses, maintaining the generator, recording the weather in a logbook that he kept on a shelf in the kitchen. He did these things every day with the same care and the same order, because that was what the work required, and because he believed that work done properly was its own kind of company. The village below the cliff was small, perhaps 200 people, fishermen mostly and their families. Osman went down to the village once a week to buy groceries and to sit for an hour at the tea house near the harbor, where old men gathered and talked about the weather and the fish and the slow changes that were coming to the coast. A new road was being built to the south. A hotel company had bought land near the beach. The young people were leaving the way young people always leave small places, not because they are unhappy, but because they are curious, and because the world calls to them in a voice that is hard to ignore.
His daughter's name was Elif. She was 28 years old, and she lived in Istanbul, where she worked as an engineer for a construction company. She designed bridges. It was precise, demanding work that required concentration and long hours, and she was good at it. Her colleagues respected her. Her manager had told her she would be promoted within the year. She had a small apartment near the Bosphorus, and from her window she could see the water, a different kind of water from the water she had grown up with. This water was busy and full of boats and noise and the lights of the city reflecting off its surface. The water of her childhood had been vast and empty and wild, and it had belonged to no one. Elif had not been home in 14 months. She spoke to her father on the phone every Sunday, and their conversations followed the same pattern every week. He told her about the weather, the wind direction, the cloud cover, whether the sea was calm or rough. She told him about her work, the projects she was managing, the problems she was solving. He asked if she was eating well. She asked if the lighthouse was running smoothly. They said goodbye. Neither of them said the things they actually wanted to say because neither of them knew exactly what those things were. She had left the cliff when she was 18, and she had not looked back, or she had told herself she had not looked back. The lighthouse had felt like a prison to her then, a place where nothing happened, where the same day repeated itself endlessly, where the only sounds were the wind and the gulls and the slow turning of the light. She had wanted noise, movement, people, challenge. She had wanted to build things that would change the shape of the world. The cliff offered none of that. The cliff offered only patience, and patience had felt to her like a kind of defeat. But recently something had changed. She was not sure when it started, perhaps a month ago, perhaps longer. She had begun to think about the lighthouse more often, not with the old restlessness, not with the desire to escape, but with something else, a kind of pulling, deep and quiet, like the current that moves beneath the surface of the sea. She thought about the sound of the wind against the tower. She thought about the way the light moved across the water in the darkness. She thought about her father, alone on the cliff, doing the same work he had always done, and she felt something she could not quite name. It was not guilt, it was not sadness, it was closer to recognition, the feeling you get when you see something clearly for the first time, even though it has been in front of you for years.
She arrived on a Friday in late September. The bus from the nearest town dropped her at the bottom of the cliff road, and she walked the rest of the way with her bag over her shoulder. The road was steep and narrow, cut into the rock, with low stone walls on either side. Wild thyme grew between the stones, and the smell of it mixed with the salt air as she climbed. Grasshoppers jumped out of her path. The sun was warm on her back. She saw the lighthouse before she saw the house. It looked the same, smaller than she remembered, perhaps, the way places from childhood always look smaller when you return to them as an adult, but the same. The white paint, the red stripe, the iron railing, the same slow turning of the light, visible even now against the pale afternoon sky. Her father was in the garden when she arrived. He was kneeling beside a row of tomato plants, tying them to wooden stakes with pieces of old string. He looked up when he heard her footsteps on the gravel. He stood slowly, brushing the dirt from his knees. He did not run to her. He was not that kind of man. But his face changed, a softening around the eyes, a slight lifting of the corners of his mouth, and she knew he was glad. They went inside. The kitchen was exactly as she remembered. The stone floor, the heavy wooden table, the shelf with the logbooks lined up in a row, the window that looked out over the sea. Her father made tea the way he always made tea, slowly, carefully, warming the pot first and measuring the leaves by hand. They sat at the table and drank it, and for a while they did not say much. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who know each other well enough that words are not always necessary. After the tea, he asked if she wanted to see the light. She said yes. They climbed the spiral staircase together. It was 112 steps. She had counted them many times as a child, going up and down, until her legs ached and her father told her to stop. The staircase was narrow, and the stone walls were cold to the touch, even in September. At the top, her father opened the heavy iron door, and they stepped out onto the walkway. The wind hit her immediately. It was strong and clean, and it carried the smell of salt and open water. Below them, the cliff dropped straight down to the rocks, where the waves broke in white lines of foam. The sea stretched out in every direction, gray-blue, enormous, restless. The horizon was a thin, dark line where the water met the sky, and above it the clouds were stacked in long, flat layers of gold and purple. Elif stood at the railing and looked out. She had forgotten how big the sea looked from up here. In the city, the Bosphorus was wide but contained. You could always see the other side. Here, there was no other side. There was only water, going on and on, until it reached something she could not see.
She had planned to stay for 3 days. She stayed for 2 weeks. She was not sure why. She told her manager she needed personal time, and he agreed without asking questions. She told herself she was resting, but she did not feel tired. She felt awake, more awake than she had felt in months, as if something inside her that had been running on automatic had suddenly switched to manual, and she could feel every detail of the day again. Each day followed a rhythm that she had once found unbearable, but now found strangely comforting. Her father rose early and checked the generator. He cleaned the lenses of the light with a soft cloth. removing the salt that the wind deposited on the glass during the day and the evening. He recorded the weather in his logbook: temperature, wind speed, visibility, cloud cover, writing each number in his small, careful handwriting. He checked the radio for Coast Guard messages. He walked the perimeter of the cliff, looking for damage to the path or the retaining walls, checking that the drainage channels were clear of debris. He did all of this without hurry, with the careful attention of a man who understood that small things, done consistently, were what prevented large problems. Elif watched him. At first, she watched from the kitchen window, holding her tea, the way she might watch a film about someone else's life. Then she began to follow him on his rounds. She walked beside him as he checked the walls. She stood behind him as he cleaned the lenses. She watched his hands, large, weathered hands with thick fingers that moved with surprising gentleness over the delicate glass of the lamp. She had designed bridges that spanned rivers and connected cities. She had calculated loads and stresses and wind forces. She understood structure and precision in the language of mathematics and engineering. But watching her father, she began to understand a different kind of precision. Not the precision of calculation, but the precision of care. He did not maintain the lighthouse because someone told him to. He maintained it because it mattered. Ships depended on this light. Sailors depended on it. The fishermen from the village depended on it. The light had to work every single evening, without exception. And it did, because Osman made sure it did, day after day, year after year, without praise and without an audience.
On the 8th day, a storm came. It arrived from the west, the way storms usually did on this coast, a dark wall of cloud moving across the water, growing taller as it approached, the wind rising hour by hour until it was howling around the tower and shaking the shutters of the house. The rain came sideways, hitting the windows with such force that it sounded like handfuls of gravel being thrown against the glass. Osman was calm. He had seen hundreds of storms in 31 years, and each one had taught him something. He checked the generator twice, made sure the fuel tank was full, and tested the backup battery system that would keep the light running if the generator failed. He secured the shutters on the house and brought the garden tools inside. He filled bottles with fresh water in case the pump lost power. Then he climbed the stairs to the top of the lighthouse and stood at the window, watching. Elif followed him up. The tower shook slightly in the strongest gusts, a deep vibration that she could feel through the soles of her feet and in her chest. The light was turning, steady, reliable, unaffected by the storm, cutting through the rain and the darkness in a bright arc that reached out across the water and disappeared. They stood together and watched. The sea was enormous and violent, the waves rising higher than she had ever seen them, crashing against the base of the cliff and sending white spray up the rock face. Somewhere out there, she knew, there might be a ship, a fishing boat caught in the wrong place, a cargo vessel trying to navigate past the rocks in poor visibility. And the only thing between that ship and the rocks was this light, this old, steady, turning light that her father had kept working for 31 years. She understood something then that she had not understood before. She had always thought of the lighthouse as a place where nothing happened, a boring place, a place the world had forgotten. But she had been wrong. Something happened here every single day. The light turned on. The light swept the water. The light told the ships where the danger was and where the safe passage lay. It was not dramatic. It was not exciting in the way the city was exciting. No one wrote about it in newspapers, but it was necessary, deeply necessary, and it had never stopped working, and that was because her father had never stopped. The storm passed by the following afternoon. The sky cleared slowly, and the sea began to calm, and the cliff was littered with broken branches and seaweed that the wind had carried up from the beach far below. Elif helped her father clean up. They worked side by side without talking much, picking up debris and stacking it near the garden wall, repairing a section of stone that had come loose during the storm. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table while her father wrote in his logbook. She watched him record the details of the storm, the peak wind speed, the duration, the amount of rainfall, the condition of the equipment afterward. His handwriting was small and careful, and the logbook was almost full. There were dozens of completed logbooks on the shelf behind him, going back decades. Each one was a record of days and months and years spent watching the sea and keeping the light burning. Each one was the story of a life lived in service of something larger than itself. She thought about her bridges. She was proud of them. They were strong and useful, and they would stand for many decades. They connected places that had been separated and made journeys shorter and lives easier. But a bridge was built once, and then it stood on its own. The lighthouse was different. It required someone to be there every day to make sure it worked. It required a person who was willing to do the same careful work over and over, not because it was interesting or new, but because it was important. And not just important in a general, abstract way, important tonight for the ship that was out there right now, in the dark, looking for the light. She asked her father what would happen when he retired. He set his pen down and looked at her. He said he did not know. The Maritime Authority had been talking about automation for years, replacing the human keepers with electronic systems that could be monitored from an office in the city. It would be cheaper, they said, and more efficient. He did not argue with this. He understood that the world changed and that change was not always wrong. But he also said that a machine did not walk the cliff path in the morning. A machine did not notice that a stone in the retaining wall was loose, or that the drainage was blocked, or that a bird had built a nest too close to the generator vent. A machine kept the light turning. A person kept everything else. Elif left on a Tuesday. She packed her bag slowly, folding each piece of clothing with the careful, unhurried attention she had learned from watching her father, the way he folded his cleaning cloths, the way he coiled a rope, the way he did everything with the same quiet precision, never rushing, never cutting corners. She ate breakfast with him at the kitchen table. The tea was hot, and the bread was from the village bakery, and the honey was from a neighbor who kept bees on the hillside behind the cliff. She did not make any promises she was not sure she could keep. She did not say she would come back more often because she did not know what her schedule would allow. She did not say she would stay because her life was in Istanbul and her work was there, and she was not ready to leave it. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. She did not know. But she told her father something she had been thinking about for days. She told him that she had spent years designing things that would last, bridges made of steel and concrete, built to survive earthquakes and floods and 100 years of weather. And she had always thought that lasting meant being strong enough to stand on your own without anyone's help. But now she understood that some things lasted not because they were strong, but because someone took care of them. The lighthouse had lasted 120 years, not because of its walls or its foundation, but because of the people who had lived inside them, people like him, who had given their attention and their time and their hands to the work of keeping something alive. Her father listened without interrupting. When she finished, he did not say anything for a moment. Then he nodded once slowly, the way he nodded when he agreed with something completely, when words were not enough and were not needed. She picked up her bag. She walked down the cliff road toward the bus stop. Halfway down, she stopped and turned and looked back. The lighthouse stood against the sky, white and red and solid. The light was not on yet. It was still afternoon, and the sky was bright. But she knew it would turn on when it needed to, the way it always did, the way it had for 120 years, because her father was there, and he would make sure. The wind blew up from the sea, carrying the smell of salt and wild thyme. Elif turned and continued walking down the narrow road. She had a long journey ahead of her, the bus, then the city, then her apartment, then her desk, then the bridges, but she was not in a hurry. Some things, she had learned, did not need to be rushed. They needed only to be done, carefully and consistently, for as long as they mattered. She would come back. She was not sure when, but she would come back. The cliff would be there, the lighthouse would be there, and her father would be standing in the garden tying his tomato plants to wooden stakes with pieces of old string, looking up when he heard her footsteps on the gravel. That was enough. That was more than enough.